Keiko Tanaka had always been different from her co-workers at Miller and Associates, a mid-sized consulting firm in downtown Chicago. While others chatted about weekend plans or complained about the weather, she kept to herself, speaking only when necessary during meetings. Her colleagues knew little about her background, only that she was incredibly skilled at data analysis and never missed a deadline. The 28-year-old had moved to America 5 years earlier, after completing her business degree in Tokyo. Her English was nearly perfect, though she still carried a slight accent that reminded her of home. She had worked hard to blend in, studying American business culture, watching sitcoms to understand humor, and practicing small talk in the mirror. Despite her efforts, she often felt like an outsider looking in. On this particular Tuesday morning, Keiko arrived at the office earlier than usual. She had been working on a complex financial analysis for their biggest client, and the deadline was approaching fast. The office was quiet, with only the hum of computers and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. She preferred these peaceful moments before the chaos of the day began. As she settled at her desk with a cup of green tea, her phone buzzed with a text message from her mother in Japan. The message was in Japanese, asking about her health and whether she was eating enough vegetables. Keiko smiled, something she rarely did at work, and typed back a quick response in her native language, assuring her mother that she was taking care of herself. "What are you typing there, Keiko?" She looked up to see Janet Morrison, the office manager, standing beside her desk. Janet was a stern woman in her 50s who had worked at the company for over 15 years. She prided herself on maintaining professional standards and had little patience for what she considered workplace distractions. "Just responding to my mother," Keiko replied politely, setting her phone aside. "In Japanese?" Janet's tone carried a note of disapproval. "You know, Keiko, this is an American workplace. We conduct all our business in English here." Keiko felt her cheeks warm. "I was on my personal phone before work hours started." "Still, it's unprofessional. What if clients walked in and heard you speaking a foreign language? What kind of impression would that give them about our company?" Janet crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "I think it's time we had a conversation about workplace communication standards." Other employees began trickling into the office, and several turned to look at the exchange. Keiko felt their stares like weights on her shoulders. She had always been careful to speak only English at work, even during her lunch breaks. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was being criticized for using Japanese in a text message to her own mother. "I understand," Keiko said quietly, hoping to end the conversation before it attracted more attention. But Janet wasn't finished. "This isn't the first time I've had concerns about your integration with the team. You keep to yourself, you don't participate in office conversations, and now this. I'm beginning to wonder if you're really committed to being part of our American team." The words stung more than Keiko expected. She had poured her heart into this job, working late nights and weekends, producing some of the most accurate analyses the company had ever seen. Her reports had helped secure 3 major contracts in the past year alone. Yet here she was, being questioned about her commitment because she had sent a text message in her native language to her mother. "I've always met my deadlines and exceeded my targets," Keiko said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Performance isn't everything, Keiko. Cultural fit matters too. We need team players who embody American values and communication styles." Janet glanced around at the growing audience of co-workers. "I think it's time I spoke with Mr. Patterson about this situation." David Patterson was the regional director, Janet's supervisor, and someone Keiko had barely interacted with during her 3 years at the company. He was known for his no-nonsense approach and had a reputation for making quick decisions about personnel matters. As Janet walked away, Keiko's desk phone rang. The caller ID showed their biggest client, Meridian Industries. She answered professionally, pushing aside her personal feelings to focus on the work that had always been her refuge. "Good morning, Meridian Industries. This is Keiko Tanaka." "Keiko, thank goodness you're in early." It was Rebecca Chen, Meridian's CFO. "We've got a crisis here. Our quarterly projections are way off and the board meeting is this afternoon. Can you work your magic on these numbers?" "Of course, Rebecca. Send me everything you have and I'll start immediately." For the next 4 hours, Keiko lost herself in spreadsheets and calculations. She discovered that Meridian had been double counting, certain assets inflating their projections by nearly 20%. It was exactly the kind of error that could cost the company millions and potentially lead to legal trouble if not caught before the board meeting. She had just finished her analysis when Janet returned with David Patterson in tow. The regional director was a tall man with graying hair and a perpetual frown that made him look older than his 55 years. "Keiko, we need to talk," Patterson said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Janet has brought some concerns to my attention about your workplace behavior and communication standards." "I'm in the middle of an urgent analysis for Meridian Industries," Keiko replied, gesturing to her computer screen filled with financial data. "This can't wait," Patterson said firmly. "Janet, please explain the situation." As Janet recounted the morning's events, embellishing the details to make Keiko's text message seem like a deliberate act of defiance, Keiko felt a familiar sensation wash over her. It was the same feeling she'd had as a child when classmates would exclude her from games, the same isolation she'd experienced during her first months in America, when every conversation felt like navigating a minefield. "Furthermore," Janet continued, "I've observed that Keiko doesn't participate in team-building activities, rarely joins office conversations, and maintains a distance from her colleagues that's frankly concerning." Patterson nodded gravely. "Cultural integration is crucial in our line of work, Keiko. Our clients expect to work with professionals who understand and embody American business values." Keiko's phone buzzed with another call from Meridian Industries. She glanced at the caller ID, knowing that Rebecca was probably panicking about the board meeting, but Patterson gestured for her to ignore it. "This conversation is more important than any phone call," he said sternly. As the meeting continued with Janet presenting what felt like a case for Keiko's dismissal, she couldn't help but think about the irony of the situation. While they questioned her commitment to American values, she was sitting on information that could save one of their biggest clients from a potentially devastating financial mistake. The numbers on her screen represented hours of meticulous work that showcased exactly the kind of dedication and skill that had made her valuable to the company. But as she sat there, listening to her colleagues discuss her fate as if she weren't in the room, Keiko realized that her technical skills might not be enough to overcome the cultural barriers that seemed insurmountable. The text message to her mother had become a symbol of everything that made her different, everything that made her an outsider in a world where she had tried so hard to belong. The meeting with Patterson stretched on for nearly an hour, and Keiko watched helplessly as her phone continued to buzz with calls from Meridian Industries. Each unanswered ring felt like another nail in her professional coffin. She tried to explain that she had urgent work to complete, but Patterson seemed more interested in discussing her attitude problem than addressing the crisis brewing with their biggest client. "I think what we're seeing here is a fundamental mismatch between Keiko's approach and our company culture," Janet said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who believed they were solving a long-standing problem. "She's technically competent, but technical skills alone aren't enough in today's collaborative business environment." Patterson nodded thoughtfully, making notes on a legal pad. "Keiko, help me understand something. You've been with us for 3 years, yet Janet tells me you've never attended a single office happy hour. You don't participate in our holiday parties, and you rarely engage in casual conversation with your colleagues. Don't you want to be part of our team?" Keiko felt the familiar knot in her stomach that came whenever she had to explain herself. How could she tell them that their office happy hours felt like minefields where every joke seemed to reference cultural touchstones she didn't understand? How could she explain that their holiday parties reminded her of how far she was from home, especially during Christmas season when her family was celebrating New Year's in Japan? "I prefer to focus on my work," she said simply. "But work isn't just about numbers and spreadsheets," Patterson replied. "It's about relationships, trust, communication. Our clients don't just want accurate reports, they want to feel connected to the people they're working with." As if summoned by his words, Keiko's direct line rang again. This time, Patterson gestured for her to answer it, perhaps realizing that the persistent calls might be important. "Keiko." Rebecca Chen's voice was tight with stress. "Where have you been?" The board meeting starts in 2 hours and I need your analysis desperately. Please tell me you found something that explains these crazy numbers. Keiko glanced at Patterson and Janet, both watching her intently. I've completed the analysis, Rebecca. There's a significant accounting error that's inflating your projections. What kind of error? Can you fix it? You've been double counting depreciation on your fleet vehicles while also including them as current assets. It's creating a phantom 20% increase in your quarterly projections. There was silence on the other end of the line, followed by what sounded like Rebecca dropping something heavy. Are you absolutely certain about this? Completely. I can send you the corrected spreadsheets immediately, along with documentation showing exactly where the error occurred. Keiko, you just saved my career, maybe even the entire company. If we had presented those inflated numbers to the board, and then couldn't deliver on those projections next quarter. Rebecca's voice trailed off, the implications clear. Patterson and Janet exchanged glances as they listened to the conversation. This was clearly not what they had expected to hear. Send me everything right now, Rebecca continued. And Keiko, I owe you dinner at the best restaurant in Chicago. You're a lifesaver. After Keiko hung up and quickly emailed the corrected analysis to Meridian, the atmosphere in the room had shifted noticeably. Patterson cleared his throat uncomfortably. That sounded like important work, he acknowledged. Meridian Industries is our largest client, Keiko replied quietly. They were about to present false financial projections to their board of directors. The correction I made could save them from serious legal and financial consequences. Janet's expression had soured further. Well, that's all well and good, but it doesn't change the fundamental issue we're discussing here. One successful project doesn't excuse ongoing behavioral problems. Behavioral problems? Patterson asked, looking between the two women. The language issue is just the tip of the iceberg, Janet insisted. There's been a pattern of antisocial behavior, lack of team, integration and cultural insensitivity. Keiko felt something inside her snap. For 3 years, she had endured the subtle and not-so-subtle messages that she didn't belong. She had worked twice as hard as her colleagues, stayed late when others went home early, and produced work that consistently exceeded expectations. She had learned to navigate American business culture, mastered industry jargon, and built relationships with clients who trusted her implicitly. Yet here she sat, being accused of cultural insensitivity for sending a text message in Japanese to her own mother. What exactly do you mean by cultural insensitivity? She asked, her voice steady but with an edge that surprised even her. Janet seemed taken aback by the directness of the question. Well, using foreign languages in the workplace creates an exclusive environment. It makes other employees uncomfortable when they can't understand what's being said. I was texting my mother before work hours on my personal phone, Keiko replied. How does that create an exclusive environment? It's about perception, Keiko. And frankly, your general demeanor suggests that you're not fully committed to integrating with American workplace culture. Patterson held up a hand to stop Janet from continuing. Let's take a step back here. Keiko, Janet has raised some concerns about team dynamics, but I have to say, what I just witnessed with the Meridian call was exactly the kind of client service that makes this company successful. David, Janet interjected, we can't let one phone call overshadow months of concerning behavior. Actually, Janet, I think we need to look at the bigger picture. Patterson turned to his computer and began typing. Keiko, I'm pulling up your performance reviews and client feedback reports. As Patterson scrolled through the data, his eyebrows rose progressively higher. These are remarkable numbers, Keiko. Your accuracy rate is 98%, which is the highest in the department. Your client satisfaction scores are off the charts. Meridian specifically requested you for their last 3 projects. Numbers aren't everything, Janet said, but her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. In our business, numbers are almost everything, Patterson replied firmly. And according to this data, Keiko has generated more billable revenue than any other analyst in her department over the past 18 months. Keiko sat quietly, watching the dynamic shift between her supervisors. She had learned long ago that her work would have to speak louder than her personality, but she hadn't expected it to become a literal battle between her performance metrics and Janet's subjective assessment of her cultural fit. Look, Patterson continued, I understand Janet's concerns about team dynamics, but I'm looking at concrete evidence of exceptional performance. Keiko, let me ask you directly. Do you feel supported in this workplace? The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her that before. For a moment, she considered giving the diplomatic answer, the safe response that would smooth over the tension and allow everyone to move on. But something about the morning's events had stripped away her usual caution. Honestly? No, I don't feel supported, she said. I feel like I'm constantly being judged for things that have nothing to do with my job performance. I'm being criticized for being quiet, for not drinking alcohol at office parties, for texting my mother in Japanese. I've never missed a deadline, never produced inaccurate work, never failed to meet a client's needs. But somehow none of that matters as much as whether I laugh at the right jokes or understand references to TV shows I never watched growing up. Patterson nodded slowly while Janet's face flushed red. Keiko, I think you're being overly sensitive. We're just trying to help you succeed in American business culture. By telling me that speaking Japanese to my mother is unprofessional, by suggesting that my commitment to the company is questionable because I prefer to eat lunch at my desk rather than gossip in the break room. Keiko's voice remained calm, but her words carried a weight that filled the silence that followed as the three of them sat in the uncomfortable quiet. Keiko's phone rang one more time. This time it wasn't Meridian Industries. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but the prefix indicated it was from the corporate headquarters in New York. Patterson noticed her hesitation and nodded for her to answer. Miller & Associates, this is Keiko Tanaka, she answered, her voice professional despite the tension in the room. Ms. Tanaka, this is Michael Rodriguez, CEO of Miller & Associates. I'm calling from our New York headquarters. Keiko's eyes widened. In her 3 years with the company, she had never spoken directly with the CEO. She was aware that he existed, of course, but he was more of a mythical figure who appeared in company newsletters and annual reports than a real person who made phone calls to individual employees. Patterson's expression shifted from curious to concerned as he realized who was on the line. Janet looked as though she might faint. Good morning, Mr. Rodriguez, Keiko managed, her voice steady. How can I help you? I just got off the phone with Rebecca Chen at Meridian Industries. She called me personally to tell me about the extraordinary work you did this morning. According to her, you potentially saved their company from a catastrophic accounting error that could have led to serious legal and financial consequences. Keiko glanced at Patterson, who was leaning forward in his chair, clearly trying to hear both sides of the conversation. I was just doing my job, sir. No, Ms. Tanaka, you were doing much more than your job. Rebecca told me you caught a 20% error in their quarterly projections just hours before their board meeting. She said your analysis was so thorough and your explanation so clear that they were able to present corrected numbers with complete confidence. I'm glad I could help them avoid a difficult situation. Help them avoid a difficult situation? Rodriguez's voice carried a note of incredulity. Ms. Tanaka, do you understand what would have happened if Meridian had presented those inflated projections to their board, only to fail to meet those numbers next quarter? They would have faced potential fraud investigations, shareholder lawsuits, and almost certain bankruptcy. You didn't just help them avoid a difficult situation, you saved their entire company. Patterson was now openly listening to the conversation, his earlier concerns about Keiko's cultural fit apparently forgotten. Janet sat rigid in her chair, her face pale. Rebecca also told me something else, Rodriguez continued. She said that when she tried to reach you this morning, your phone went unanswered for over an hour. She was starting to panic because she knows you're always available for urgent matters. Is everything all right? Keiko looked directly at Patterson and Janet. I was in a meeting discussing workplace communication standards. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Communication standards? While one of our biggest clients was facing a potential crisis? Yes, sir. I see. Ms. Tanaka, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Do you feel that you have the support you need to do your best work at Miller & Associates? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Keiko could feel Patterson's eyes on her, could sense Janet's barely contained anxiety. She thought about all the times she had bitten her tongue, all the microaggressions she had endured, all the moments when she had felt like an outsider in her own workplace. Mr. Rodriguez, I believe my work speaks for itself. I'm committed to providing excellent service to our clients and maintaining the high standards that Miller and Associates is known for. That's a very diplomatic answer, Ms. Tanaka, but it doesn't answer my question. Let me be more specific. Do you feel that your colleagues and supervisors appreciate your contributions and create an environment where you can succeed? Keiko took a deep breath. She could give another diplomatic non-answer, or she could tell the truth to the one person in the company who might actually be able to do something about it. Honestly, sir, there are times when I feel that my performance is overshadowed by concerns about my personality or cultural background. I've consistently exceeded my targets and received excellent client feedback, but I sometimes sense that these achievements are viewed as less important than other factors. What kind of other factors? Things like participating in social events, engaging in casual office conversation, or conforming to certain cultural expectations that don't necessarily relate to job performance. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had a different tone. Ms. Tanaka, I'm going to ask you to do something for me. I want you to document everything you just told me in a detailed report. Include specific examples, dates if you can remember them, and any witnesses to these incidents. Can you have that to me by the end of the week? Yes, sir. Good. And Ms. Tanaka, I want you to know that what you did for Meridian Industries today exemplifies exactly the kind of excellence and dedication that built this company. Your technical skills, your attention to detail, and your commitment to client service are precisely what we value most. After Rodriguez hung up, the room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Patterson cleared his throat nervously, while Janet stared at her hands. Well, Patterson said finally, that certainly puts things in perspective. Janet looked up sharply. David, we can't let one phone call from the CEO change our assessment of ongoing behavioral issues. Janet, I think we need to seriously reconsider what we're calling behavioral issues. The CEO just told us that Keiko potentially saved one of our biggest clients from bankruptcy. He specifically praised her technical skills, attention to detail, and client service. Those are exactly the qualities we should be celebrating, not criticizing. But what about team dynamics? What about cultural fit? Patterson leaned back in his chair, studying Janet's face. You know what, Janet? I'm starting to wonder if the problem isn't Keiko's cultural fit. Maybe the problem is that we haven't created a culture that values the contributions of someone like Keiko. Janet's face reddened. I resent the implication that I'm somehow biased against Keiko because of her background. I'm not implying anything, Patterson replied evenly. I'm stating directly that we've been so focused on whether Keiko fits into our existing culture that we haven't stopped to consider whether our culture needs to evolve. Keiko watched this exchange with fascination and growing hope. For the first time in her 3 years at the company, someone in authority was questioning the assumptions that had made her workplace experience so challenging. Think about it this way, Patterson continued. We have an employee who consistently delivers exceptional results, who has generated more revenue than anyone else in her department, who has earned the personal praise of our CEO, and whose work potentially saved our biggest client from bankruptcy. If we can't figure out how to support and celebrate someone like that, then the problem isn't with the employee. Janet stood up abruptly. I think this conversation has gotten off track. My concerns about Keiko's workplace behavior remain valid, regardless of one successful project. One successful project? Patterson's voice rose slightly. Janet, I'm looking at 3 years of successful projects. I'm looking at client feedback that consistently praises Keiko's professionalism, accuracy, and responsiveness. I'm looking at performance metrics that put her in the top 5% of all employees company-wide. As Janet gathered her papers and prepared to leave, she turned to Keiko with an expression that was equal parts frustration and resignation. I hope you understand, Keiko, that my concerns come from a place of wanting to help you succeed in American business culture. Keiko met her gaze steadily. I appreciate that, Janet. But I think success in American business culture should be measured by results, not by how well someone conforms to social expectations that have nothing to do with job performance. After Janet left, Patterson and Keiko sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, he spoke. Keiko, I owe you an apology. I should have looked more carefully at your performance record before allowing this meeting to go on as long as it did. Your work this morning with Meridian Industries was outstanding, but more importantly, it's representative of the quality you've been delivering consistently. Thank you, Keiko replied simply. I want you to know that I'm going to be having some serious conversations with my team about how we evaluate and support our employees. What happened this morning shouldn't have happened, and I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen again. As Keiko returned to her desk, she felt a mixture of exhaustion and cautious optimism. The morning had been emotionally draining, but for the first time since joining Miller and Associates, she felt like her value as an employee was being recognized for what it actually was rather than being diminished by what it wasn't. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the office shifted in ways that were both subtle and profound. Keiko noticed that her colleagues seemed to be looking at her differently, though she couldn't quite determine whether it was with newfound respect or uncomfortable awareness. Word had somehow spread about the CEO's phone call and her role in saving Meridian Industries, though she suspected the story had been embellished with each retelling. Marcus Williams, a senior analyst who sat 3 cubicles away, approached her desk on Wednesday afternoon. They had worked in the same department for 2 years but had rarely exchanged more than polite greetings. He was known for his easy charm and his ability to make clients laugh during tense meetings, qualities that Keiko had always envied from a distance. "Hey, Keiko," he said, perching on the edge of her desk in a casual way that would have been unthinkable just a week earlier. "I heard about what you did with the Meridian account. That's incredible work." "Thank you," she replied, not sure where the conversation was heading. "I have to admit I never really understood what you did over here. I mean, I knew you worked with numbers and stuff, but I didn't realize how complex your analysis actually was." He gestured toward her computer screen, which displayed an intricate spreadsheet filled with financial projections. "This looks like rocket science to me." Keiko felt a small smile tug at the corner of her mouth. "It's not rocket science. It's just about understanding patterns and relationships between different variables. Once you know what to look for, the numbers tell a story." "A story?" Marcus looked genuinely interested. "I never thought of spreadsheets as storytelling. Every company's financial data tells the story of what they've done, where they are now, and where they're headed. My job is to read that story and help them understand what it means for their future." As they talked, Keiko realized that Marcus was asking genuine questions rather than making polite conversation. He seemed genuinely curious about her work, and for the first time in years, she found herself explaining her analytical methods to a colleague who actually wanted to understand. "You know," Marcus said after she had walked him through a particularly complex forecast model, "I think I owe you an apology. I always assumed you were just antisocial or something. I never realized you were over here basically solving puzzles that could make or break entire companies." The honesty of his admission caught her off guard. "You don't owe me an apology, Marcus. I know I'm not the most outgoing person in the office. Maybe not, but that doesn't mean we couldn't have made more of an effort to get to know you. I mean, hell, you're probably the most talented person in this entire building, and most of us didn't even realize it." Their conversation was interrupted by David Patterson, who appeared at Keiko's desk with a stack of papers and an expression that suggested, "Important news." "Keiko, I need to speak with you privately," he said, glancing at Marcus, who took the hint and returned to his own desk. In Patterson's office, Keiko found herself facing a very different version of the man who had sat in judgment of her just 3 days earlier. He seemed energized, almost excited, as he spread several documents across his desk. "I've been doing some research since our conversation on Tuesday," he began. "I pulled your complete file, including all your performance reviews, client feedback, reports, and project outcomes. I also spoke with several of our clients to get their perspective on your work." Keiko waited, unsure whether to expect good news or bad news. "The results were remarkable," Patterson continued. "Not only do you have the highest accuracy rate in the department, but your clients consistently praise your communication skills, your responsiveness, and your ability to explain complex concepts in ways they can understand. He picked up a printed mail. This is from Tom Bradley at Zenith Corporation. He says, and I quote, "Keiko Tanaka is the most professional and insightful analyst we've ever worked with. She has an unusual ability to identify problems that others miss and to present her findings in clear, actionable terms. We specifically request her for all our major projects." Patterson set down the email and picked up another document. This is from Sarah Martinez at Global Dynamics. She wrote, "Working with Keiko is like having a crystal ball for your business. She sees patterns and trends that give us a significant competitive advantage. Her reports are so thorough and well organized that our board members specifically ask for her analysis on major decisions." As Patterson read testimonial after testimonial, Keiko felt a complex mix of validation and sadness. She was gratified to learn that her clients valued her work so highly, but it was painful to realize that her own colleagues and supervisors had been unaware of these professional relationships. "There's more," Patterson said, his voice growing more serious. "I also spoke with Michael Rodriguez about our conversation on Tuesday. He asked me to look into not just your performance, but your overall experience here at Miller & Associates." Keiko's stomach tightened. She wondered if she had been too honest during that phone call, too willing to voice concerns that might now be seen as complaints. "Rodriguez told me something that really made me think," Patterson continued. "He said that in his experience, the best employees are often the ones who focus so intensely on their work that they don't have time or energy for office politics. He said that when you find someone like that, you don't try to change them. You create an environment where they can thrive." Patterson leaned back in his chair, studying Keiko's face. "He also told me that Miller & Associates has been selected to handle the financial analysis for Meridian's acquisition of 2 smaller companies. It's a $20 million project, and they specifically requested you as the lead analyst." The news hit Keiko like a physical blow. A $20 million project would be the largest she had ever handled, the kind of assignment that could define a career. "There's something else," Patterson said, pulling out one final document. "Rodriguez has asked me to recommend you for promotion to senior financial analyst. The promotion comes with a 30% salary increase, your own office, and direct authority over junior analysts." Keiko sat in stunned silence. Just 3 days earlier, she had been sitting in this same office listening to Janet Morrison question her commitment to American business culture. Now she was being offered the promotion she had dreamed of but never dared to expect. "I don't know what to say," she finally managed. "You don't have to say anything right now," Patterson replied. "But I do want you to know that this promotion isn't just about your technical skills, impressive as they are. It's about your professionalism, your integrity, and your unwavering commitment to excellence." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "I also want to apologize for what happened on Tuesday. Janet's concerns were based on outdated and frankly irrelevant criteria for success in our industry. I should have recognized that earlier and intervened before the situation escalated." "What will happen with Janet?" Keiko asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "Janet and I have had several conversations this week about appropriate workplace standards and evaluation criteria. She's agreed to attend diversity and inclusion training, and we're restructuring the office management role to focus more on operational efficiency and less on subjective assessments of employee behavior." As Keiko walked back to her desk, her mind reeled with the implications of everything Patterson had told her. The promotion would change not just her salary and job title, but her entire relationship with the company. She would have her own office, her own team, and direct access to senior leadership. But perhaps more importantly, she would finally have official recognition that her value as an employee came from her skills, her dedication, and her results, rather than from her ability to conform to social expectations that had nothing to do with her job performance. That evening, as she sat in her small apartment reviewing the documents Patterson had given her about the promotion, Keiko allowed herself to feel something she had rarely experienced in her professional life: genuine excitement about her future. For the first time since joining Miller & Associates, she felt like she truly belonged, not because she had changed herself to fit in, but because the company had finally recognized her worth exactly as she was. 2 weeks later, Keiko found herself standing in the corner office that would soon be hers, watching as maintenance workers installed her nameplate on the door. Keiko Tanaka, senior financial analyst, looked both foreign and familiar at the same time. She had imagined this moment countless times, but the reality felt surreal. The office was larger than her apartment bedroom, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of Chicago's downtown skyline. There was space for a proper desk, a small conference table for client meetings, and built-in bookshelves that she was already planning to fill with industry publications and reference materials. Pretty impressive, isn't it? She turned to find Marcus Williams standing in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. He had made a habit of stopping by her cubicle each morning since their conversation the previous week, bringing coffee and asking questions about her work. She had come to look forward to these brief exchanges, surprised by how much she enjoyed having someone genuinely interested in her analytical methods. It still doesn't feel real, Keiko admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. 3 weeks ago, I was being lectured about workplace communication standards. Now I have my own office. Marcus settled into one of the chairs by the window, gazing out at the city below. You know what's crazy? I've been thinking about that whole situation with Janet, and I realized something uncomfortable about myself. What do you mean? I mean, I was just as guilty as anyone of making assumptions about you. Not malicious ones maybe, but assumptions nonetheless. I thought you were unfriendly because you didn't join our conversations about sports or reality TV shows. I never considered that maybe you just didn't have anything to contribute to those particular topics. Keiko sat across from him, cradling her coffee cup. To be honest, I did feel left out of those conversations, but I also didn't know how to join them without feeling like I was pretending to be someone I wasn't. That's what I'm talking about, Marcus said, leaning forward. We created this environment where you felt like you had to choose between being yourself and being accepted. That's not okay. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the doorframe. Rebecca Chen from Meridian Industries stood there with a broad smile, carrying a large gift basket wrapped in cellophane. I hope I'm not interrupting, Rebecca said, but I wanted to personally deliver this before your promotion becomes official. Keiko stood to greet her, still adjusting to the idea that clients would now be visiting her in her own office rather than meeting in sterile conference rooms. Rebecca, this is Marcus Williams, one of our senior analysts. Marcus, this is Rebecca Chen, CFO of Meridian Industries. As they shook hands, Rebecca's eyes lit up with recognition. Marcus Williams, I've heard wonderful things about you from our project managers. You're the one who can explain complex financial concepts using sports metaphors, right? Marcus laughed. Guilty as charged. Though I have to say, after working with Keiko these past few weeks, I'm starting to think my metaphors are pretty elementary compared to her analytical frameworks. Rebecca turned back to Keiko with an expression of deep gratitude. I cannot overstate how grateful our entire company is for what you did 3 weeks ago. The board was so impressed with your analysis that they've asked us to restructure our entire financial reporting system based on your recommendations. She handed Keiko the gift basket, which contained an assortment of Japanese teas, artisanal chocolates, and what appeared to be several books about financial analysis techniques. I did some research and learned that you studied business in Tokyo before coming to America, Rebecca explained. I included some books by Japanese financial theorists that I thought you might find interesting. There's also a first edition copy of The Art of Japanese Business Strategy that I found at a rare bookstore. Keiko felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. It was the first time since starting at Miller & Associates that someone had acknowledged her background as an asset rather than a barrier to overcome. This is incredibly thoughtful, Rebecca. Thank you. Actually, there's something else I wanted to discuss with you, Rebecca said, settling into the remaining chair. Meridian is planning to expand into the Asian markets over the next 2 years, starting with Japan. We're going to need someone who understands both American business practices and Japanese corporate culture. Marcus raised his eyebrows. That sounds like a major opportunity. It is, Rebecca agreed. We're talking about a consulting contract that could be worth over $50 million to Miller & Associates. And frankly, Keiko, I can't imagine trusting anyone else to lead that kind of cross-cultural initiative. Keiko set down her coffee cup, her mind racing. You're talking about long-term strategic consulting, not just financial analysis. Exactly. We need someone who can help us navigate the cultural nuances of doing business in Japan while maintaining the analytical rigor that American investors expect. Your background gives you a unique perspective that we simply can't find anywhere else. After Rebecca left, Marcus and Keiko sat in contemplative silence for several minutes. Finally, Marcus spoke. You realize what just happened, don't you? 3 weeks ago, Janet was telling you that your Japanese background was a liability. Now you're being offered a $50 million contract specifically because of that same background. Keiko nodded slowly. The irony isn't lost on me. It's not irony, Marcus said firmly. It's injustice. Janet and others like her almost cost this company one of its most valuable employees because they couldn't see past their own narrow definitions of what an American professional should look like. Over the following days, word of the Meridian opportunity spread throughout the office, and Keiko found herself experiencing something entirely new. Colleagues actively seeking her input and perspective. People who had barely acknowledged her existence for 3 years were suddenly interested in her opinions on everything from client relations to market analysis. At first, she was suspicious of this newfound attention, wondering if people were simply trying to position themselves favorably with someone who now had significant influence over major accounts. But gradually, she began to recognize that many of her colleagues' interests were genuine. Sarah Kim, a junior analyst who had started at the company 6 months earlier, approached Keiko's new office on Friday afternoon with a stack of reports and a nervous expression. I'm sorry to bother you, Sarah began, but I was wondering if you might have a few minutes to look at my analysis of the Henderson manufacturing account. Keiko gestured for her to sit down. Of course. What seems to be the problem? I can't figure out why their profit margins are so inconsistent from quarter to quarter. The revenue is steady, but the profits swing wildly, and I can't identify the cause. Keiko looked over Sarah's work, noting the thoroughness of her research and the logical structure of her analysis. Your methodology is solid, she said, but I think you might be looking at the wrong variables. For the next hour, Keiko walked Sarah through a different analytical approach, showing her how to identify hidden relationships between seemingly unrelated data points. As they worked together, she was struck by how much she enjoyed the teaching aspect of senior-level work. You're brilliant at this, Sarah said as they concluded their session. I feel like I learned more in the past hour than I did in my entire graduate program. You did all the hard work, Keiko replied. I just helped you look at it from a different angle. As Sarah gathered her papers to leave, she paused at the door. Can I ask you something personal? Keiko nodded. When you first started here, did you ever feel like you didn't belong? Like you were constantly being judged by standards that didn't make sense? The question brought back a flood of memories from Keiko's early days at the company. Every single day, she answered honestly. How did you deal with it? Keiko considered the question carefully. For a long time, I thought the answer was to work harder and hope that my performance would eventually speak for itself. That strategy worked, but it took much longer than it should have, and it was much more painful than it needed to be. What would you do differently if you were starting over? I would find allies earlier. I would speak up for myself sooner. And I would remember that the problem wasn't with me. It was with a system that valued conformity over competence. After Sarah left, Keiko remained in her office as the sun set over Chicago, reflecting on how dramatically her life had changed in just 3 weeks. She thought about the text message to her mother that had started everything, and she wondered, what would have happened if the CEO hadn't called that day? If Meridian hadn't been facing a crisis? If circumstances hadn't aligned to force a reckoning with the assumptions that had shaped her workplace experience? But as she looked out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering darkness, she realized that those circumstances weren't really coincidental. Her expertise had always been there, her value had always been real, and her contributions had always mattered. The only thing that had changed was that the right people had finally paid attention. 6 months after the incident that nearly cost her job, Keiko stood before a packed conference room at Miller and Associates headquarters in New York, presenting the preliminary findings of the Meridian Japan expansion project. The room was filled with senior executives, including CEO Michael Rodriguez, who had flown in specifically for this presentation. The project had exceeded everyone's expectations. Keiko's unique understanding of both American business practices and Japanese corporate culture had enabled Meridian to navigate complex negotiations that other consulting firms had abandoned as impossible. She had identified cultural nuances that made the difference between successful partnerships and costly misunderstandings. The key insight, Keiko explained, clicking to her next slide, is that Japanese companies prioritize long-term relationship, building over short-term profit maximization. Traditional American negotiation tactics that focus on immediate financial benefits actually signal untrustworthiness in Japanese business culture. She gestured to a chart showing partnership success rates. When we restructured Meridian's approach to emphasize gradual relationship development and mutual benefit over multiple business cycles, their partnership success rate increased from 15% to 85%. Rodriguez leaned forward in his chair. Keiko, what you're describing sounds like it could revolutionize how American companies approach Asian markets. That's exactly what we're seeing, Keiko replied. The framework we developed for Meridian is already being adapted by 3 other major corporations who have struggled with Asian expansion. After the presentation, as executives filed out of the conference room discussing the implications of her findings, Rodriguez approached Keiko with an expression that mixed admiration with something that looked like apology. That was extraordinary work, he said. But I have to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. 6 months ago, you almost lost your job because someone questioned your cultural fit. How does it feel to be standing here now, having just presented a strategy that could transform how this entire industry thinks about cross-cultural business? Keiko considered the question carefully. It feels like validation, but also like a reminder of how much talent gets wasted when organizations focus on the wrong criteria for success. Rodriguez nodded gravely. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. We came very close to losing one of our most valuable employees because we allowed subjective cultural assessments to overshadow objective performance metrics. What happened wasn't just about me, Keiko said. It was about a broader failure to recognize that diversity of background and perspective are business assets, not cultural liabilities. You're absolutely right, Rodriguez agreed, which is why I wanted to speak with you about something. We're creating a new position, Director of Cross-Cultural Business Development. It would involve leading initiatives like the Meridian Project, but also developing training programs to help our entire organization become more effective at international business. The offer was tempting, but Keiko had learned to think carefully about opportunities that seemed too good to be true. What would that role actually involve on a day-to-day basis? You would have a team of analysts reporting to you. You would work directly with our biggest clients on international expansion projects, and you would have significant input into our hiring and training practices. Essentially, you would help ensure that what happened to you 6 months ago never happens to anyone else. Over the following weeks, as Keiko considered the director position, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. The incident with Janet Morrison, which had felt so devastating at the time, had ultimately become the catalyst for changes that went far beyond her own career. Janet herself had undergone a transformation that surprised everyone, including Keiko. After completing the diversity and inclusion training that Patterson had mandated, Janet had approached Keiko with what appeared to be genuine remorse. I've been doing a lot of thinking about our conversation 6 months ago, Janet had said during an awkward but sincere conversation in the break room. I realize now that I was applying standards that had nothing to do with job performance and everything to do with my own comfort level with cultural differences. I appreciate you telling me that, Keiko had replied, still somewhat wary but willing to listen. I also want you to know that I've learned something important from watching how your career has developed since then. I used to think that helping employees succeed meant helping them fit in. Now I understand that real success comes from creating an environment where people can excel as themselves. The conversation had been far from comfortable, but it represented a level of self-reflection and growth that Keiko hadn't expected from someone who had seemed so rigid in her thinking. As Keiko settled into her new role as Director of Cross-Cultural Business Development, she discovered that her most meaningful work involved mentoring other employees who faced similar challenges to those she had experienced. Young professionals from diverse backgrounds sought her out for advice on navigating workplace cultures that often seemed designed for people unlike themselves. One afternoon, a junior analyst named David Chen knocked on her office door with an expression of frustration that she recognized immediately. "I'm sorry to bother you," he began, "but I heard that you might understand what I'm going through." David explained that he had been passed over for a promotion despite having the highest performance ratings in his department. The feedback he received focused on leadership presence and cultural fit, rather than his technical abilities or client relationships. "They keep telling me I need to be more assertive, more confident, more willing to speak up in meetings," David said. "But when I do speak up, they say I'm being too aggressive or not collaborative enough. I feel like I can't win." Keiko listened to his story with a mixture of empathy and anger. Despite all the changes that had occurred at Miller & Associates, some of the same underlying issues persisted, just in more subtle forms. "The problem isn't with your leadership style," she told David. "The problem is with leadership criteria that assume there's only one way to be effective." Over the following months, Keiko worked with David to develop strategies for demonstrating his leadership capabilities in ways that felt authentic to his personality and cultural background. More importantly, she used his situation as a case study to push for broader changes in how the company evaluated and developed leadership potential. The work was challenging and sometimes frustrating, but it was also deeply satisfying in ways that purely technical analysis had never been. Keiko found herself becoming an advocate not just for individual employees, but for systemic changes that would prevent talented people from being overlooked or undervalued. On the one-year anniversary of the incident that had nearly cost her job, Keiko received a text message from her mother in Japanese asking about her health and whether she was eating enough vegetables. This time she replied in Japanese without hesitation, adding a photo of the healthy lunch she had prepared that morning. As she set down her phone, she realized that the text message which had started everything wasn't really about language at all. It was about the fundamental question of whether she could be successful while remaining true to herself, whether she could contribute to American business culture without abandoning the parts of her identity that made her unique. The answer, she now understood, wasn't that she had to choose between authenticity and acceptance. The answer was that organizations had to evolve to recognize that diversity of perspective, background, and approach were essential ingredients for success in an increasingly complex and interconnected world. Looking out the window of her corner office at the bustling city below, Keiko felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had not only survived the challenge to her place in the company, but had used it as an opportunity to create lasting change that would benefit countless others. Her story had become proof that sometimes the greatest professional victories come not from conforming to existing expectations, but from forcing those expectations to expand, to accommodate excellence in all its forms.